Hey everybody, this is Lee, and I am joined by my guest for this series I'm going to be starting, where it's basically talking about like art, music, kind of the intersection there. But we have Lucas here with Shoggoth Kinetics. Correct me if I'm wrong on the mispronunciation there.
That's right.
Perfect. Well, I've been a huge fan of his work for quite some time. He's worked with bands like Blood Incantation, Tomb Mold, Universally Estranged, doing anything from album artwork to merch artwork. And he has a very distinct style that I think a lot of us can appreciate. Just a couple quick announcements before we just get into just a conversation here. I wanted to mention that my friends at Heavy Metallurgy did an interview last week, or really more of like a discussion with Mark Riddick, talking about their favorite album artworks. And I thought it was a really cool episode. So if anybody's watching this and hasn't checked that out, feel free after tuning into this to give that a shot. So that would be Heavy Metallurgy with Marty and Alan. And then a couple other quick things is that, an artist that was very esteemed in the metal underground, Justin Bartlett, he just recently passed away. So I just wanted to kind of give my condolences. I didn't know him personally, but anyone who's seen his artwork, it has a very distinct style. Definitely can get your emotions going in terms of how visceral it was. So I just wanted to comment on that. And I believe there's like a GoFundMe about, his funeral costs. So I'll link that in the bio down here below for the YouTube video. But that being said, Lucas, thanks for joining me. How's your week been?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me. It's good to be talking to you, Lee. It's been kind of a busy week. I've been trying to catch up on a lot of commissions that I've got going on. So the year is already starting off pretty packed. So I'm probably going to be working through this weekend to kind of get caught up with the workload that I've got going on right now. But other than that, it's been pretty good. Yeah.
Nice. So in terms of like your commissions, I was reading an interview from 2021 with Cult Nation. I believe you teach at the University of Notre Dame as well, like painting and drawing.
I did before we moved out to Lancaster, before we moved to Pennsylvania. Yeah, I did. I taught at Notre Dame for about 5 years after I finished my MFA there. So I taught for 2 years as a grad student. They have part of their program is you teach as instructor of record for 2 years, but you only teach one class. And then after that, I taught for a year full time, and then I taught as an adjunct for like another 4 years there. So quite a bit of experience teaching introductory drawing. I taught figure drawing. I taught intro painting, and I also taught the senior capstone class for the whole department. So that was studio art students, design students, industrial design students, and I basically work with them to help them kind of figure out their thesis, defend their thesis, and then put their thesis work in a gallery for their actual show. So I had quite a bit, a wide range of teaching experience. I taught a little bit the last 2 years at the Pennsylvania College of Art and Design in their illustration department, but mostly teaching kind of concept-based classes. A little bit kind of farther from my wheelhouse. I really do kind of like to be teaching studio stuff. I like to be teaching students how to use charcoal, how to use pens or pencils, all that stuff, the basics of observational drawing. That's kind of my favorite part. There's a lot of cool stuff you can actually do with that aside from just aside from just doing exercises and stuff. So I usually did quite a lot with my drawing classes when I taught at Notre Dame.
Very cool. And in terms of the students and kind of their perception of your art, would you show them your art, and they're like, hey, this is really interesting or unique, or would some people be disturbed by it? What was their common reaction?
Yeah, I mean, the students at Notre Dame were pretty conservative. I mean, they were not conservative in the sense of being necessarily politically conservative, but they were kind of sheltered, so they haven't really seen a lot of stuff like what I was doing. I made it a big point to show them a lot of artists too, because they would come into either our art program or they would be taking art classes as electives or whatever, and they would come into these art classes with this really specific preconceived idea of what art was. And they would think it was the Western canon. They would think it was Matisse and Degas, and they would think it was Picasso. They would think it was Banksy was the big artist. I had to actually later on in my teaching, tell students to not do presentations on Banksy because we all freaking know who Banksy is. Like find an artist that you never heard of before to do your presentation. So I tried to show them tons of artists. I always kept a running list of 100 like artists and illustrators to look at, just stuff that I knew would kind of blow their minds because they'd never seen anything like it before.
Yeah.
So like the first time I'd ever shown them like Christian Rex Van Minnen or Sean Norvit, or I mean just like a ton of other painters and artists out there. I show them like exactly.
I'm a fellow fan.
Them, yep. Show them like Mark Riddick, stuff like that, and they would just be like, "This is art," and most of them would kind of like they would, I mean, they're really polite students, so they'd kind of put up with it. They kind of put up with me making them listen to like, Hyperdontia in the classroom or something. I like literally like, all right, we're gonna listen to Rat today, and then tomorrow we're gonna listen to like the most sludgy, disgusting death metal that I can put on, or we might listen to, I don't know, some like 80s hardcore or something like that.
Nice.
And they would just be like, but they'd put up with it, like no one would ever say anything. So I was kind of funny. They were good sports about the sort of stuff I would subject them to. And one or two students, maybe a year, would really kind of get into it. They'd be like, I really like this stuff. I really like what you're playing in class.
Nice.
Not many.
Not many.
I was pretty much the only metalhead I ever confronted, like encountered among, like there was not really any among the student body. One of my colleagues at Notre Dame was a big metalhead, and he was in a tech death band.
Okay.
But most of the students were pretty straightforward. They wore the North Face clothes to class every day, and they're like their favorite band was either Imagine Dragons or Panic at the Disco. So, which I thought was kind of weird. So, like, wasn't
deep cuts?
Yeah, like wasn't that kind of big like in the late 2000s? And it's like 2015. Why are you still into this? That's weird, but whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, you'd think they'd maybe be slightly more ahead of the curve, but yeah.
Fair enough. You would think they would be like a little more on the cutting edge, being like young people and college students, but they would like stuff that was like that's not popular when I was in college. Like that's weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're good sports about it. My students at PCAT are more kind of traditional art school students, so they're sort of less. Their minds are less blown by what I'm showing them, but they are like, wow, that's really, really detailed. I've never really, I tried to show a lot of artwork that's like what kind of gets me excited about making art. And so a lot of stuff with like high levels of detail and realism, highly, highly rendered artworks.
Totally.
I really like that stuff. And I like to kind of, not to like talk shit, but I kind of like to push students away from like anime as their sole touchstone for what illustration or what art should be, like try to get them to think about, there's all this heavy metal illustration and traditional sword and sorcery fantasy illustration. There's pulp horror illustration. There's horror comics. Like there's all this other stuff, even in just the genres that are like horror and heavy metal and cult, cult pop culture stuff. There's even all this stuff. They don't really look at any of it. They just basically look at anime. So I try.
Yeah, it's just so narrow. Because to me, the best anime or like current Japanese art is like this really interesting blend. Because there is some cool stuff that definitely touches on that. Like, somebody recently who I really like. A lot of inspiration for me. It comes from similar places, but I like a lot of. There's some really good tattoo artists out there a lot, and I take a lot of inspiration from that. So like, there's this guy named Water Street Phantom who does. Some stuff that has like a little touch of like that Japanese flavor, but he blends it with some of those shapes and design elements that like you'd even see in kind of like the Lovecraftian kind of stuff, which is pretty cool.
Right. Cool. Yeah, they're very, very cool. Yeah, I mean they all like a lot of them like Junji Ito, so there's like a way in with them through stuff like that. So that's there's always a way in, but it's been interesting to kind of see that the very different sensibilities that like Notre Dame students have against like kind of a more traditional like art school student.
Yeah. Have you done any like atelier courses or like any experience with like that versus a traditional art school?
I haven't, no. And I haven't really thought about it that much, to be honest with you. My kind of like teaching experience with like the onset of the pandemic really kind of burned me out on teaching a little bit. Like I've been teaching a lot less these last 2 years. I've only been teaching like like one semester a year, and then I've been able to kind of take the rest of the year off of teaching and just focus on illustration.
Yeah.
The pandemic really made things kind of rough if you're in education in any capacity, but especially like in the classroom, and especially trying to teach like studio art online. It was such like 2020 was such a mess. It was such a huge mess. Like
I can imagine that's difficult.
Yeah, so I have really like not thought about more ways to engage in education outside of the classroom because I've just been like trying to minimize
No, totally.
my presence in the classroom these last 2 years. I've been trying to like just do it so I can keep my foot in the door. I get a hankering to teach, like it's fun to teach. I enjoy it, but I've also been just wanting to have more unstructured time to just work on illustration. And I've even been trying to like this year I'm really hoping to spend less time on commissions and more time on my own work.
Totally.
Because I've only really been doing this full-time or semi-full-time. I've only really been doing this since about like 2019. 2018 was the year where it kind of like started to happen, and then 2019 it went crazy. Like it was just I did something like 46 or 47 individual pieces of artwork in 2019, and that's like, it's almost a piece of artwork a week,
Yeah, it's a shit ton.
That's including paintings and stuff. So it really kind of happened in 2019, and in all that time, I have not made a single piece of my own merch. Like I have not made a shirt, I have not made a print. I haven't had time to do it because anytime I get a few of my own ideas out, I get clients asking, "Hey, do you have anything that you could just license us?" And I'm like, well, this is all I've got. All I've got is the stuff I've been making for myself. So yeah, I guess that's it. Like I'll just license that out. At least it gets out there and I get paid for it. But I'd really like to kind of push the sort of, I hate to use the word branding. It really, really makes me want to throw up in my mouth. But I really would like to kind of push the Shoggoth Kinetics branding a bit. Like get some shirts out there. I've been working for like 3 years on trying to come up with a logo that I actually like. Like I just every time I come up with them, I don't like this one. I just throw it out. It's kind of hard to settle on. Like I can see why when I do logos for clients, why they're so picky about logos, because they suck. Like making a logo sucks. You're like, I'm gonna have to live with this. I'm gonna have to live with this for at least a few years before I could change it.
I can imagine the struggle.
Yeah, I just have not had the time or energy to do any of that stuff, and I'm really hoping to get on it this year. And like, not teaching helps. Raising my prices a little bit helps.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like I'm gonna fight really hard for my free time this year so I can actually make some merch to sell. I'm gonna get a store set up. My wife is very kindly, even though she's extremely busy with her job, and she's really the breadwinner in our household at this point. I'm kind of like, me doing this is kind of like a little bit of a lark. She's kind of supporting me a little bit through this, so she's very kindly offered, like, I'll make you a website with a store if you want. I'm like, yeah, I
sounds like the relationship I have with my wife.
Yes.
Not at this point though. I still have like a more traditional corporate job for now, but I'm aspiring to get to where you're at, but I'm not there yet. You know what I mean? So I know my place at this point, but it's just awesome even talking and hearing about this stuff. I'd love to get a book by you. You could be past album covers too, but like some of your personal stuff too. I would buy that up in a heartbeat. Right. But I'm a big book collector, so
yeah. I've been thinking, like, the other thing I've been thinking about this year is like I should do a zine. I'd love to do a zine. But once again, it's like, do I have the time? Like, what do I have that I could put in it? I could do just an art zine, but my impulse is like, oh, but I want to write too because I freaking love writing. I spent a lot of time doing when I was doing my MFA. I spent a lot of grad school writing, even though I was a painter.
Yeah,
it's just kind of how it shook out. I really, really enjoy it. So I'm like, well, if I'm going to do a zine, I want to put some writing in it. What do I want to write about? I have a lot of stuff laying around. So, it's a matter of finding the free time. And I'm really, like, once again, like I said, I'm really hoping this year that I'm going to win that fight for having more free time. Do
you think you'd lean more pen and ink stuff, or do you think you'd do more painting if you had more free time right now?
Oh man, I mean, there's no end to the amount of stuff like that I think about doing all the time. Like, there's no. Yeah. I think I'm always suspicious, in fact, of especially when like young artists are starting out and they're like, I just don't know what to draw. I just, I have struggled to come up with ideas, and I'm like, My experience is the opposite. I have way too many ideas. I have more ideas than I could possibly execute in my lifetime. So I'm like, yeah, I'll be like laying awake.
Prioritizing.
Exactly. I'll be laying awake at night like thinking, oh man, I could get back to painting like my old studio paintings. I have so many ideas for those paintings. I have so many ideas for like just straight up like pulpy kind of dumb illustrations that I want to do. Like I've got all these ideas being around in my head. I'll start writing stuff down. A lot of times I'll like get up in the middle of the night and start like typing stuff up into a Google Doc that I've got on my phone because I can't sleep and I'm coming up with too many ideas to
kind of like a word mapping of it instead of a sketch. Because sometimes I'll do the same thing. That's really cool.
I just have pointed like an image that would be this or an image that would be that, or I'll have docs that are just like concepts that I'm kind of thinking through, just kind of putting together some writing for. So, yeah, if I was to do a zine, I'd probably stick more with pen and ink just because it's faster. But I really want to get back to like painting. I mean, I love painting album covers. It's really, really great. But it's been a few years since I painted like this kind of studio work I was making in grad school. And there's a kind of a part of me that really wants to get back to doing that too. Like maybe try to show some work in a gallery a little bit more. My last gallery show was probably 2018 or 2019. I haven't shown anything since then. It's just been illustration. I mean, there's good reason for it. The illustration work pays. Like showing work in galleries, most of the time, if you're gonna submit to like a call, you've got to pay to. So it's like you got to spend money to show work in a gallery, and maybe you'll sell something. Probably not though.
It's a whole different business model.
It's a whole different model. I mean, you really almost have to have another source of income supplementing it. So for me, it was like, well, illustration kind of supplements it, and then illustration kind of just became the thing. It kind of just took over. I'm like, well, I'm just doing this now.
Well, every time you make a piece, somebody else wants one similar. So by creating more, you're just marketing more. Even if you're not like super intentional and like business minded about it, it still just happens. That's probably why 2019 was like the tipping point for you. Cause I think that's when I really just saw your stuff blow up. And then I saw my merch collection blow up too. Like I'm wearing one of yours here.
Yes.
Yeah. I actually have a question about this one when we get to like the presentation later, because some of your choices I just find so interesting in like a good way. Like anything I can understand about how you're thinking about these pieces. And the whole point of this interview, even to begin with, is like, so I see these kind of conversations happen with like other artists, but I think there's so many metal fans who are interested in artwork, but they're not exposed to like the more academic or like the concept art scene that's out there.
Right.
So kind of trying to bring a little bit of that conversation that I like hear from like, the Proco channel. Like, I don't know if you know Stan, or he had that really good podcast with Marshall, who's like the perspective master, which is still like my nightmare, is thinking about perspective and trying to get everything just right. But I think there's a void there that, that's what I'm hoping to have with these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm like happy to talk about that side of it because, maybe I'll just kind of dive into a little bit of it now. Like I'm not, full reveal. I'm not trained as an illustrator at all. Like I never took an illustration class. So my like background is actually in biology. My undergraduate degree is in biological sciences. And I had started off wanting to go into art. Like I'd always had kind of an affinity for it in high school, and I took a lot of art classes when I was in high school, but I didn't go to like a real like magnet art school. My school district that I went to when I was in high school was like really kind of poor, so we didn't have money for that stuff. But I enjoyed art quite a bit, and I took when I kind of got to community college, like that's where I started off. I went to community college for 2 years, and I took a lot of art classes there, and I really wanted to do it, but like 19 years old, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it or what I was really that interested in. And my parents were kind of like, no, you should do something where you can actually make money. And they kind of kept pushing at that. And I think part of it was I wasn't really that committed to it at 19. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I switched over to science. I always had an interest in science, so I switched to biology. I majored in biology. I got a degree in biology. I thought I was going to become, first I thought I was going to become a scientist, then I thought I was going to become a high school like bio and chemistry teacher. And I went to grad school for a little bit to get a master's of art in teaching, and I did my student teaching in 2009, just after the 2008 financial crash.
Oh, man.
And I didn't enjoy my student teaching at all. And all of my friends who were also trying to become teachers, well, those who had jobs at that point were all getting pink slipped, like when I was doing my student teaching. So I was like, you know what? I didn't really enjoy this, and I don't really want to get a job that I'm just going to get laid off of every year or every 2 years for the foreseeable future. So I decided to just kind of kicked around for a couple years. It was like, what? It was like 2009, so I was like 28 then. I kicked around for a few years, and then was like, you know what? I'm going to go back to art school. Like, I have a job. I can probably kind of afford it. I can probably kind of swing it. I was looking already at like grad school programs for MFAs, and most of the programs that I wanted to get into, like, this is kind of a little piece of knowledge, insider knowledge. You don't need a BFA to get into most MFA programs. You just need a bachelor's and then a portfolio that proves you can do creative work. And you probably kind of want a good portfolio. So some of the programs I was looking at, I'm like, I've been out of practice for a while. I mean, I've been drawing. I drew the whole time I was a biology major. I did some of my first actual illustration commissions when I was still majoring in science, but I hadn't really done kind of high concept studio art type work for years. So I decided to go to the College for Creative Studies in Detroit. I'm from Detroit originally.
Okay.
So I applied there I kind of put together a portfolio of shit in 2010. I got in 2011. I just turned 30. Here I am, 30-year-old art student. That's cool, right? But when I was at CCS, honestly, I was not the only person there my age. In fact, the age range in my cohort was actually pretty crazy. There were 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds kids out of high school, but there were 70-year-olds in my cohort. There were guys in their 40s. There were a bunch of people that were in their 30s too.
So there's more people having crises besides just you.
Exactly. More people having crises. Yeah, exactly. So I had a blast. It was one of the first things I really did that I felt like I kind of fully committed to. I was like, oh, I'm really into doing this art thing. I did 3 years. I ran out of student loan money. And they're you either need to pay for your fourth year yourself or you need to do something else. And I was like, well, I think I've got the portfolio I need to go to grad school. So I just started applying to grad schools, and it was 2012, I think I started applying. And I had a couple of criteria for that. I was like, I'm going to look for free programs. I don't want to pay a cent for grad school. In fact, I would like to be paid to be in grad school. So I was looking for programs that had a stipend, had an assistantship basically. And I was looking for programs that were 3 year because I thought 2 years seems like a really short amount of time to do an MFA. And I wanted programs where I got to teach. And so I applied to a bunch of places, and it was they were okay. I looked at the faculty work. I was like, this stuff's cool. I'll see what happens. And one professor was like, you should look at Notre Dame. And I was like, Notre Dame? What? That is the last school I ever would have thought of. Isn't that Catholic school?
Yeah.
So I went and looked at their program though, and I freaking loved their painters. The faculty that were teaching there, Jason Larry and Maria Tomasula. Their work was Jason does. Jason was my colleague at Notre Dame, who's in a tech death metal band.
Okay.
I don't know if he's gonna get in trouble for me saying this. He tries to keep it on the DL that he's a death metal guy, but he does these collage paintings that will have different kind of bits of pop culture, but they'll always have a band logo in them, and it's usually a big death metal logo. He's got a pretty famous one that has a huge Suffocation logo in it, and it's got other little stuff from Star Wars, and then.
So he does the collage and then paints it, basically, uses a reference.
He does a bunch of different methods. He uses he has a machine that cuts does vinyl cutting, so he'll stencil a lot of stuff in. He'll create digital files that will then get cut on his vinyl cutter, and then he'll kind of paste them onto the painting, airbrush it on. Other stuff he paints by hand, and other stuff he'll have he'll project on it and he'll paint over it. so he can get them correct. But there'll be like bits and pieces from like internet memes will be painted in there, and there'll be like a big death metal band logo, and there'll be like something, like I said, something from Star Wars or something from a video game, like a piece of weird pixel art.
That sounds really cool.
And then he does like a bunch of text. He like writes this text where it's usually like they're always like made up stories, but it's always implied. There's always like a male figure, and there's always like a female figure in these stories, and it's always the male figure being humiliated in some way. So it's got this very interesting. It's like this very interesting exploration of like kind of a certain kind of like middle American pop culture inflected like white masculinity that's sort of being
interesting.
Yeah, and he's like clearly like from a place of like loving that because that's what he grew up into, but also it's kind of done with humor. So his paintings are great. Of like there's death metal logos in these, so this guy's got to be cool. And Maria Tomasula's paintings are just the most incredible, detailed paintings you've ever seen in your life. If you've never looked at her work, you should look at her work. I'll like.
So like mostly landscape figure. What kind of?
So she will create these like fully kind of invented. They're almost like still life, but they're not. There will be like big, huge pieces of like fruit that's like cut open. There will be like weird like dolls that are in there. Lots and lots of like insects, and then like jewels and droplets. These are really, really amazing. Like they're usually symmetrical. I don't know how she achieves. I mean, this is all done by hand. She's not using computers at all for hers. It's all done by hand, and it's like rendered with such excruciatingly fine detail. She basically goes in. And like you could see, like if there's like a figure, you could see like every eyelash on them. But when you look really close, you can't see a single brush stroke because she basically painstakingly makes sure it's like rendered completely smooth with no brush strokes at all. And yet, so it looks almost photographic. Her paintings are incredible. So I saw those two painters and was like, well, I have to go work with them. That's great.
Totally.
I applied there, and I got in there. That ended up being my first choice school, even though I applied like literally a week before their deadline. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a painter. I was going to be a studio like artist painter. I was going to be, showing work in galleries, and I was going to try to do the academic route of becoming a professor.
Yeah.
And I had a blast in grad school. It was one of the best things I ever did. I got to work with some really, really amazing people. I got to meet some really, really amazing scholars. Got to have some really, really cool opportunities. I made some really, really interesting work, at least, as far as I'm concerned. And then I got out, and I graduated and tried to find a job. And that was, like, I got lucky my first year that Notre Dame needed a visitor. Like, they needed they had a 1 year position open for a visiting painter. And I was very, very lucky to get that. So I got to make like real people money for 1 whole year, and put off being in the job market. But after that, once I started trying to apply for actual academic jobs, like trying to get like jobs teaching painting, basically like tenure track type, it was so disillusioning and disheartening and like soul crushing. If you've never had to apply for an academic job, it's the worst. Like the application process is horrible for the most part. It's not, and then it's not like it's not standardized across the field, so every school wants something different. And it takes forever. It's like a full-time job in and of itself to try to apply for these jobs. And then as you start looking and like seeing what's coming up, like you got academic keys, and you've got all these other like listservs that you belong to that tell you about jobs that are like coming up. You start actually looking at them, and you're like, there are like 50 jobs a year coming up, like globally. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's way more people that want to do that.
Like thousands of people who want these jobs, and there's like 50 of them come up a year. And most of them aren't even like good ones. They're not like tenure track. They're like, this is a 3-year contract job where we can just get rid of you after 3 years and you're back on the job market again. It's like, so at around the time that I was getting really disillusioned with the idea of like becoming a full-time academic, was when I started getting commission work. I was really, really lucky to have a buddy of mine who played in a couple bands in Detroit, and he like booked Tomb Mold in Detroit and asked me to do the flyer artwork. So he was kind of always like pushing my artwork to people.
Yeah.
And so that kind of got me seen by the Tomb Mold guys. And then he had me do something. He was like showing my art. He also booked Blood Incantation in Detroit in like 2016 too, and was like showing my artwork to them. And apparently they got really into it. When Paul finally contacted me in like 2017 or 2018, he's like, "Yeah, we have the band has like a whole thread where we just talk about your artwork." I was like, "Really? Wow, freaking amazing!"
It's a perfect fit, you know.
Yeah, it's like, wow, okay, well, that's very, very cool, and it's all because my buddy Jared, who is in the band Sekusu, and a couple other bands, he was really pushing my stuff a lot. So around the time that I was like, I don't know if I want to fucking do this, or I don't even know if I can become an academic. Like, I don't even know if I can get a job as a a tenure track job as a painting professor. Was when the commission work started coming in, and then that became like by 2019, I was like, well, I think this is what I'll just do. Even though like I said, I didn't train as it, and I never expected to do it as a job. So like I've been like kind of learning all the professional side of it by the seat of my pants. Because when I took professional practices classes in grad school and even at CCS, they were all geared towards like how to get a tenure track job, like what's
right,
the
not being
process?
independent,
how to write a grant, like stuff like that. It wasn't like how to do a business. You know what I mean? I specifically was like, I don't think I want to do a business. Now here I am trying to run a business, completely unexpectedly. So it's all been like trial and error and a lot of error. I think more than anything else, I've kind of learned a lot of what I've learned by doing it the wrong way or making the mistake, you know?
Yeah, that's the best way to learn in art in a lot of ways. And just life. I had a quick question. So I was curious. So before you went into art school, so you're around 30, was your art style similar, just not as developed? Like, were you still drawing the same type of subject matter, or did it shift a lot in the last like 10 years?
That's a complicated question. I think there's like, it's a quick question that I don't have a quick answer to.
That's fine.
I have a long answer to it. I think there's a pattern emerging here. I think that there's two, like, because I work with students, I always try to talk through this kind of stuff when I teach as well. I think there's two aspects to style that can be kind of that we can make a distinction between. Like, I think there's personality, right? There's like stuff that you're always kind of interested in that kind of makes you who you are. There's like a baseline certain way that you move your body when you make art that's going to affect your mark making and make your marks look a certain way.
Right.
And I think that's going to always be, for the most part, consistent through your whole art career. And then there's style in the sense of like who you look at, what you've learned, what all the influences are, what you've read, what all of your like subsequent experiences are as you keep going through life. And that part, I think, evolves.
Right.
And so I would say, yeah, on the one hand, there definitely was like certain stuff. There definitely was like certain stuff that I was always interested in, and a certain kind of, I don't want to say style, but a certain personality that was always evident in the work I was making. If I look back on stuff from like 12 or 13 years ago, I can see the seeds of where I am now in it.
Yeah.
But I think that there's been a lot of evolution since then too. Like, first of all, I had never picked up a paintbrush before I was 30. I took my first painting class when I was 30. And so I have no paintings from prior to 2011. I have no paintings ever. So that's like a totally new development. That's like completely, having to learn a completely different medium and completely different visual language or form language. And so that definitely evolved. And I learned a lot about drawing. The other thing too is like I never really took a formal class on pen and ink drawing. I've basically just adapted what I've learned in, actual drawing classes and what I've learned in painting classes. I've just sort of adapted it to drawing. Like, hey, wouldn't this be cool if I could try to figure out how to do this, but in drawing? And so it's just been a lot of experimentation with the medium of pen and ink, and a lot of experimentation with like watercolor, which I was also not trained in. And a lot of like just like looking at artists. I mean, that's like honestly spend a ridiculous amount of time looking at artists. As awful as Instagram is as a platform, is like hard is making it like harder to do the job that I want to do, and how we're all kind of reliant on these private platforms. It is a really great place to look at art still.
Totally.
So like constantly looking at stuff and being like, okay, this artist is making a move I really like. Can I figure out a way to add this move to my repertoire? Like that's what I'm doing like all the time. That's kind of what I was trained to do. And,
Yeah.
And so in that respect, I do think, my style has definitely changed a lot since then. Yeah, for sure. I'm always trying to add new things.
That's a really good answer. And then when you were in, actually in school and you were producing work then and like, probably larger paintings and stuff, was some of it a little more conventional in terms of like figure landscape, or is it still like your style and you were trying to get into the galleries with what you're doing kind of like now?
Like I said, I was 30, so I already kind of knew who I was, so I wasn't going to be like, they were going to break me down and have me start from scratch. I was like, no, I want to make monsters. I want to figure out a way to make monsters and have it be like, what's the conceptual side of talking about like weird monster shit? You know what I mean? Because like I said, I had done a degree in biology, and the reason that I did that was because I was always interested in like weird invertebrate animals. I loved weird invertebrate animals. I love insects. I love arthropods. Love slugs and worms. And like in my undergrad, I learned about like animals I never even knew existed before that are just completely bizarre. And I think one of the things that attracted me to that is that because their bodies are so different than us, they must have a completely different way of existing in the universe. Basically, they have a completely different experience of being alive. And like just thinking about that always really like, kind of put a lot of gas in the tank for me. Basically, it always made me really, really inspired. And my response, even when I was a biology major, was I just started drawing stuff. Like we were learning about a new animal, I would just start drawing it. I would just find it really fascinating to sort of think about the existence of these things. So by the time I got into art school, I was like, I very much want to just make weird insectile slime creatures because I'm really interested in that already. And so it was basically like, you had to take classes like figure painting where you just had to paint figures. But I got to take a lot of like kind of concept-based classes too, where we got to kind of do whatever we wanted to as long as we were like making a body of work. And so I would be like trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I paint like an insect creature? I only know how to paint from life. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not an illustrator. And I would just make shit up. And eventually I kind of figured things out. I mean, I would look at a lot of YouTube tutorials too. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like spending a lot of time like, all right, how do painters do this stuff? How do illustrators do this stuff? Let's see. And like go online, look at, okay, so I'll just try to use that then. And then the other part of it too was like, when I went to grad school too, I learned a completely different way of painting. That's also something that kind of helped too. Like when I was at CCS, the school of painting that they taught was this very much kind of impressionistic figure painting that was all about like laying down like very, very, they called it keeping it fresh. You got to keep the painting fresh. So you lay down.
Right. You don't overwork it.
Yeah. You lay down a block of color and then you just lay out on a block of color next to that. And then, if you've done it correctly, by the time you're done, it sort of resolves into a semi, photorealistic painting of a person. But it's all about like, it's almost like color theory. It's all about laying colors next to each other to get the illusion of human skin and things like that. And that was one way of painting, but you could see like, I want to do stuff that's like this. I don't like blocks.
Yeah,
that's fine, but I want another layer of detail over top of that. I want it to resolve to an even finer degree. And when I got to grad school, Maria Tomasula taught me like, well, this is how I paint to paint like this. If you want to paint like this, and that kind of revolutionized it for me. But I was always kind of aware of what I wanted to do. Even when I was first starting out, my portfolio was full of like weird shit monsters that I had drawn that I was particularly proud of at that point. So
nice. And then you just got better at drawing weird shit monsters.
I like to think I've gotten better. Yeah, I like there's certainly a through line. There's certainly a through line from like the early art to now. There's definitely you could say that's probably Lucas. He was definitely there's insect legs sticking out of it, so it's probably Lucas.
I mean, for me, like, so here's where I think, and this is obviously personal opinion, but I think where music and art sometimes don't overlap is so commonly with bands, their first album is like their best. When I see visual artists, I think they produce their best artwork usually when they're at least 40 to 50 and even in their 60s. Not all the time, but right. I do think it's way more common that way.
Yeah. And Yeah, it's such an interesting dynamic because like in the art world in general, you're not considered mid-career until you're like in your 50s or 60s. That's mid-career. Late career is like 80s and 90s. You know what I mean? Like if you're still around, that's late career. Early career is basically from the time you're like 17 all the way through like 45. You know what I mean? And so the fact that I didn't really even start like my training in this until I'm 30, I was kind of conscious that I'm behind the curve. Like I look at a lot of my contemporaries and I'm like, man, like these guys are so good. They've been doing this since they were like 20 years old. They're like my age now, so they've been doing this for 20 years. I've only been doing illustration professionally for like 5 years maybe at the most, at the outside. So I'm always like very, very conscious of where like areas where I have to grow. And so I look at people's work like very, very, I don't want to say critically, but I look at their work really, really with a lot of intent, like to find out like, okay, what can I learn from like what some of these other illustrators are doing, and I think like things like composition, like I really like to look at like Matt Sticker is really good. I think he's got some really good like compositional instincts that I'm like, man, I need to learn some of that because I always feel like I struggle with composition. Artists who are really good with like color theory, like I always feel like I struggle with color a little bit, and so sort of just kind of like seeing what kind of choices they make and how I can kind of up my game there. And I'm always looking at artists for like possibilities for like mark making, because I really do think that a key to being like an engaging illustrator, like one that people want to look at, is that your mark making is really varied throughout a work, that you really can produce distinctions between textures. Like texture is really important to me, and I don't know if anyone's ever noticed that.
Oh, clearly, yeah.
Like I really, really fuss over texture. And so I'm always looking at other artists like, man, this guy or this woman really gets like this amazing texture, like when they try to render this in their work, and I want to figure out how to do that. So I'll like look at it very, very closely, like because I want to add something like that to my work. They say like, good artists borrow, great artists steal. But I think like the upshot is it just takes a really long time to get to the point where you have acquired like a huge reserve of skills, and you've got like a huge repertoire of moves you can make and like different marks that you're able to make. Yeah, I can see why it like takes until late.
It's a true endurance test, that's for sure. Yeah. Very humbling along the way. There's always somebody better,
Always.
Yeah.
And usually like people who are like a lot better.
Yeah. You just want to just continuously work your way up. So it's cool to hear. But just that you keep going up too. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, but it is interesting with music how like it's like sophomore album slump is like such a thing with a lot of. I've read a lot because I'm like I'm a musician too, so I've like look into that stuff, like read a lot about a lot of I don't know, read a lot of journalism about music, I guess, and so I like hearing people's opinions about why there's such a thing as the sophomore slump, even for underground bands that aren't like on a recording timetable like a band that's like got a signed contract with a large label. And I do wonder if it's like they'll say things like, oh, it's because the first album they've had like a really long time to put it together.
Yep.
They've had a lot of material to edit out. They've basically been able to edit down to the best. And that, sure. But I also wonder if there's like something about like when you listen to some of the old death metal from the 90s, and it's like even like old hardcore punk from the 80s, you're like something about like teenagers having good instincts, like really weird thing. Like why should they? It doesn't seem right. And yet you'll like, man, you'll listen to an album and you're like, this is freaking genius. And these kids were like 18 when they put this album out. What the fuck? Like, how did they do that? Like, and now they're like, they're like, it's like maybe like a legacy band. They're still putting out albums, and the magic has just been gone. You know what I mean? Like the instincts. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's something about the urgency of the fact that you're, when you're like that age, you're just pumped so full of adrenaline, it just makes your brain operate on a different level. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I think it is. There is such a weird flip between the way it works in music sometimes and the way it works in art. Like, in some ways, I kind of like that about art, because I feel like, well, I'll always get better in art. I'll never get worse. Like, I can always kind of inch forward. I can always at least claw like another a new technique that I can try to get some level of mastery over. But with music, it's like it's very few people like continue to get better throughout their whole career in a like a straightforward linear way. I mean, most people hit like a peak and then it's all kind of downhill from there, or they sort of just plateau at the very least, right?
Totally. No, those are really good points, and I pretty much wholeheartedly agree. I think too, just when you're younger, number one, you have more to prove, but then there's also just the element of like you maybe haven't gotten quite as jaded by life, and that maybe makes more enticing heavy metal music, I guess. Like
right, and probably you haven't learned all the rules, so it's all the rules that you're breaking that you like unconsciously you don't realize you're breaking all these like rules of music theory and things like that. You don't even know you're doing that. You just do what sounds right to you. And I think later, once you kind of, you learned all the rules and you feel like you can't go outside them, or else you'll make a bad song or something like that. You just get kind of used to through habit doing things a certain way. Yeah, I think that makes sense too. That totally makes sense.
Yeah. So in terms of some artists that have been inspiring you a lot recently, and then I'm also curious about like kind of your mainstays, like you can always come back to them that are going to inspire you. Like I imagine we probably have some overlap with like Michael Whalen and like Ian Miller. Like you always go back there because that's always going to be a well of like amazing stuff. But what in terms of like maybe some like newer artists that you've just been exposed to have been getting your eye?
I don't know her actual name, but on Instagram it's like Saprophile. You've probably seen. She did that Hammers of Misfortune album that's just coming out like this year.
Yeah, I have it right here actually.
Yes, that.
Yeah, she's amazing.
When she first like popped up on my radar, like maybe last year, the year before, I was just like, whoa! Look at the mark making skill on this, the ability to like kind of convincingly render values in ink, the amount of patience that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of floored, and I've been a really big fan of her work since she first came on my radar on Instagram.
Yeah, that's all hatching in the background there.
It's all hatching. It's incredible. Yeah. It's so insane. A lot of that value work, even that sense of that like sun that has that feel of it glowing.
Yeah,
that's just all of her hatching work is just like ridiculous. So she's definitely one that I've been looking at quite a bit. Trying to think about who else.
It definitely has a concept art feel too. Like it reminds me of the Final Fantasy, like kind of artwork in an element, which obviously is a great place to derive inspiration. Like that's the type of like Japanese art that I really enjoy is the Final Fantasy concept art.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I'm trying to see here. I'm kind of looking through my Instagram to see who else I've been looking at because my feed is there's someone I just discovered who does kind of more like kind of like pixel art that's sort of inspired by like the language of like old video games.
Mm-hmm.
Their Instagram name is Plastaboo.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, their work is really really freaking cool. I don't know if it would be like necessarily influential on mine, but it's definitely something I discovered within the last few weeks that I've been looking at a lot. Let's see who else. There's a guy who does. I don't know his actual. Let me see if I know his actual name. Ricardo Ailes. His Instagram is Bird Cult with a V. He basically just draws birds, but they're like really, really, nice. Really well like done drawings, and they're very, very interesting compositions. He has a very, very good.
And they're like real life birds, so it's like he's a really good wildlife artist, you could say.
They're not like. I mean, they're anatomically accurate. They're not like wildlife images. He's not going like drawing from life. He's like. You have to look. He does really really interesting prints. They'll have like strange like maybe they'll be like string or sticks or like weird geometric shapes or something. He's a big fan of like keyholes and keys. So their birds are part of the imagery. There's clearly something else kind of going on there. It's not just like birds. Like birds are kind of something that he's interested in maybe for their metaphorical content as well. But they're very very visually stunning like pen and ink drawings for the most part. He does a lot of prints too.
Okay.
So, really, really cool artist who I like a lot. Let's see, I'm kind of just flipping through. Let's see, like newer artists. I mean, if I could say like expand it to the last the last couple of years, like Caroline Harrison has been like a big influence too. Like I really love her work. Her ability to render texture is also another thing that I find kind of really, really stunning in her work, and the sort of patience that goes into the way she builds up her images.
Does she work with like the music scene stuff, or is it?
Yeah, she's done stuff for like Piron and trying to think like some of the bands that those guys
like the latest album cover for Piron with like the hands and there's like a rat thing.
She's done a couple of album covers for Piron.
Okay, then I recognize her work. There's a nice I don't know. It kind of has a little bit of an impressionistic kind of quality to it. There's still a little bit of rough around the edges, but it's obviously very refined too. Like it's got that balance.
Yeah. As far as mainstays goes, there's quite a few of those. Obviously, when I first started out, like actually doing illustration, I was musically involved, kind of in the DIY punk underground, and so there was a lot of way too much Pusshead influence. We'll just say way too much Pusshead influence.
Yeah.
But I mean, that kind of got me my start. The very first commission that I'm actually kind of proud of was I did a really early shirt for Municipal Waste back in like 2003, like just before Waste 'Em All came out, just before the first album came out. And I really they still have that shirt. They still print that shirt up, which is kind of amazing to me. So it's 2023, so it's like 20 years later. So I did that shirt when I was like 22. But it was very, very, very obviously Pusshead influenced. But I still like to, even though I kind of went through that phase, and sometimes I kind of like, my Pusshead phase,
yeah,
it's not so good. But I'll still look at Pusshead's work and go, amazing, I love it. I just got a book from an artist who I've been looking at for years. I picked this up for my birthday.
What you got?
This is the Called by Cthulhu's The Eldritch Art of Dave Carson.
I'm gonna try blowing you up. I'm new to this. Let me see if I can figure it out.
Let's see if I can find a good one in here. He's got a lot of really, really cool ones. So, I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
So it's really, really heavy his stuff is really heavy on stippling. I'm a huge Lovecraft fan, and I used to buy the old Chaosium Call of Cthulhu fiction series books when I was in my late teens and early 20s. I probably have a nearly complete run of them from the 90s through to the early 2000s. And a lot of them have his artwork on the inside. Like he would do a lot of borders for like the table of contents. Mm-hmm. And I ate that shit up when I was, 19, 20 years old. I loved that stuff. And so he's always been like a mainstay. And there were years where I would like not really think about him at all. And then come back and be like, man, I really love his illustrations. So I finally like splurged and got the hardcover of one of his art books, so I can keep it as a reference. I'm this year.
It's good, like long sleeve reference. The borders. Like you could get a lot from that.
Exactly. So like one of my like goals for this year is to like 100% more stippling in my artwork. Like I'm gonna push for there to be a lot more stippling in the work this year. So now it's gonna be out there in the world that I've said this. So I better.
I'll hold you accountable.
People better hold me accountable.
Do you spend more time with ink brush or pen with like for instance with like this, right? Like did you do more brush and then add pen for like the finer details, or how did you go about it?
Yeah, so my process has changed a little bit over the years too. So when I first started doing this stuff, I would mostly work with a combination of like brush pens, and then I would switch over to microns for like the fine detail. And I would say the last like 3 or 4 years, partly because of economic reasons, like brush pens are expensive and they don't last very long. Like after a while, the nibs just get worn out and they just get shitty.
Like these types.
Yeah.
Do you use like the Tombow kind of thing?
I use the Faber-Castell Pitt pens. I really, really like.
Oh, okay.
And they did for a while. They started doing like they have a stiffer nib, and then they had one that was like a softer, like kind of more flexible nib. And I liked both because they allowed you to do a lot of stuff that you could do with the brush. The problem is because they were like felt tip nib pens, they would wear out very quickly and kind of become gross, and you couldn't really get really, really nice clean marks with them. So I started, like, just for economic reasons, working with a brush because the brushes last a lot longer and like ink is way cheaper. Like just buy a huge bottle of ink.
Yeah.
And so since then, the brush part of my process has become more and more prominent because I started to realize like, oh no, you can do like a lot of shit with just the brush. So, but it always ends up with like the finest details are done with like the Micron pens, and since
Definitely.
Micron has come out with it 003, I've been like, oh yeah, like even more detail, even finer with it. I mean, I don't do
what
that.
millimeter is that? Because I do like the smallest I have is the 0.2 millimeter. Is that like even tinier than that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the super
Oh yeah,
small.
yes. This is a 03 here. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's a 003, so
Yeah.
it's a an order of magnitude finer. I don't do a lot of that stuff for shirts because I don't know if that detail is going to come out really well in shirts. But
Right.
when that's just going to be something that's going to be in print, like I go all out. Like, all right, going all the way down to the 003 for this is going to be crazy, you know. But so yeah, it's a combination. It's like there's like three stages, basically. I can say four stages. Like lay out the pencils, um, go in with the brush and do all of like the solid black values. Is what I say. Like try to block in
Yeah.
whatever I think is going to kind of indicate like the light source and kind of create a sense of volume for all the whatever elements are in the image. And then it's like kind of go in, start doing contour lines, and then start doing detail. And then the final stage is to go in with I use white gouache in a brush
Yeah.
to do any sort of white. I've tried a whole bunch of different ways to put white on ink drawings, and I haven't really liked any of them as much as white gouache in a brush.
So like you don't like these the Poscas?
I can't stand them. They get too gummy. Like
Yeah.
you get to
Oh yeah.
constantly clean the nib off, and so it just disrupts my workflow too much. I would rather deal with the fact that with like white gouache, you do sometimes have to go over what you've done a couple times before it finally gets opaque enough. But I'd rather deal with that and be able to keep making marks than something where I've got to constantly stop and kind of clean it up. I tried the jelly rolls. I tried the
Jelly rolls aren't powerful enough to cover. That's what I've found. They're just
yeah, and then there was another one that was like Pentel, I think, made like these Sigma that were also like a kind of a gel white. But I just found they get too gummy. They're like it's like trying to use whiteout. It's like trying to paint with whiteout. It's like not really great control. And I find that like designers white gouache, like titanium white gouache, is like the best solution because I can control the brush. Like I can use a different kind of, I can use really small brushes if I want to use small brushes. I can
right.
lay in white, and then like the gouache is actually kind of nice because if you fuck up and you need to fix something, like you can to an extent draw over the white gouache. Like it will take the ink nicely, like nice enough. It's not as good as the paper surface, but it does work.
Right. If you're going to reproduce, it can be overcome. I can imagine. So you're using gouache beyond even just correction. Like because
I use it if there's like stars or if there's like little drippy white bits in it.
yes.
Anything that's small, fine white details. If I have to correct something, like if I made a tentacle and I accidentally cut in on the tentacle and like made it too thin in a spot, I go back in with white gouache to fix that. But yeah, there's a whole stage, the very final stage that usually involves at least an hour with white gouache to go over the whole thing and touch it back up and add any like kind of finishing special effects or details I want to add to it. So yeah, it's become like a longer, more tool intensive process as I've kind of learned. Like there's now, it's like I learned this as a painter too. Like you'll be working on a painting and you'll have that one brush. Maybe you spent $45 on it, or maybe you spent $70 on it. It's a really expensive brush. You only use it for one thing. There's only one thing it's good for. But you cannot do that one thing without that brush. And so you're fine with like investing in all of these tools. And I found that there's like more and more specialized tools to draw with the longer I've been doing this. So it's like it definitely goes through a process where I like shift between the tools that I'm using. And I actually kind of enjoy that. I kind of have become a bit of an art gearhead where I actually kind of like
well, yeah, I like talking about this stuff too.
Like supplies, like gear. I like going to Blick in Philly or something and like, oh, I've never seen this before. I'll pick one of these up and see what I think of it. I like trying stuff out, seeing what effects you can get,
Do you use mostly like the real horsehair, or do you use synthetic hair for like the ink work? Like I have like a Winsor & Newton Series 7, and I don't know, maybe I'm just misusing it, but sometimes I have trouble getting a really good point on it. Then the synthetics, I can get a better point, but
Yeah, I like the ones I exclusively use for drawings are the Cotman watercolor brushes, the Winsor and Newton Cotman watercolor
Okay.
and design brushes. Those I think are all synthetics. And I actually, even as a painter, I mostly prefer synthetics, except for with like mop brushes. If you want to use like the really fine
Like the
bristle
squirrel
brushes
hair.
for, yeah, like it's stuff for just blending. Like you might want natural bristles for that. But honestly, everything else, it's all synthetic for me because they last longer. They can retain their shape a little bit better. You can, yeah, you can get those kind of fine points on them. They clean up a lot nicer, and they're usually not as expensive as like
Oh yeah, way
the
cheaper.
real, yeah, way cheaper. But I love the Cotman brushes. I use those for my pen and ink drawings. I use those for watercolor. They're designed for watercolor. I use them for, yeah, if I'm going to mess around with gouache. And I even use them. There's parts of my oil paintings I use them for a lot too. So they're
Interesting.
really just like good. They're really good versatile brushes. They make a lot of different kinds, you know. Like there's a lot of different like bristle forms that they make for those. So I mostly just use rounds when I'm doing drawings because I'm not, you know, most of the textures are going to be kind of rendered through the use of pen and hatching. But
Right.
if I'm doing something with watercolor, I might use like flats and I might use like filberts and I might use like a mop brush. If I'm actually going to lay down like large swaths of color, I want to get a particular, you know, I want to get a particular mark that's really quickly and freshly made. I carry that over. That freshness has got to be in the watercolors too. I was like overworking my watercolors for quite a
Dude,
while.
that's such an
Did
easy
not know.
mistake to make.
I did not know what the fuck. I never took a class on it. I didn't know what I was doing. I started watching these guys on YouTube and I'm like, oh shit, I'm overworking my watercolors. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
most common mistake, and like everyone makes it.
Yeah.
That so I have like a couple points, and this is great because I feel like this is very art centric interview. But
Yeah.
with watercolor especially, do you feel how often do you feel like you're battling it versus you're in harmony with it? Because watercolor is so unforgiving sometimes, you know.
Yeah. I have, yes, I have resolved like within the last, like maybe last year, I started kind of, I think the trick with it that I've learned, it's not really a trick. It's just like, it's just patience. And so it's like with watercolor, you have to take your time. There's no, even though it dries quickly, it's not a speedy medium to use. Like I started to learn like, okay, if I want the painting to turn out the way that I want it to, or I want the drawing to turn out the way I want it to in terms of the color application, then I need to just do one color area at a time and let it dry. Not
Mm-hmm.
try to mess around and overwork it. So like go in very, very carefully, lay in like the freshest and most kind of quickly, you know,
Like the tea
gestural.
wash, kind of like that
Yeah.
really thin. Yeah.
Yep. Start with it. Yeah. Start with the tea wash, and don't do any contiguous areas. Like don't do anything that has to touch something else. Wait for it to dry and then come back in. You know what I mean? And the nice thing is, like I have learned, like there are some things that you can, like it's not the most forgiving medium, but there are some things you can fix. Where like, you know, if you put water back on it, like you can get some of that, you know, pigment to flow a little bit again. So if you've like gone over a line or something, you can go back in with pigment and kind of brush it out and like kind of get a pristine edge back on something. And I just found like patience is like kind of the number one key. It's the opposite. The other thing is it's like the opposite logic of most painting and drawing, which is start with your darkest darks and then go work up to light.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Whereas like watercolors, start with your lightest possible wash of pigment you're going to do, and then slowly build up dark values. Like that's been like a hard thing because I'm trained as an oil painter, and I was just trained as like darkest darks, darkest darks, darkest darks.
Yep.
Because with oil paint, just the way that like titanium and other like white pigments are just the way their pigment strength is, it is hard to darken something down if you get too light with it. And even then with layers, it's like you have to keep going over it and over it and over it to get it opaque enough. If you start too light, it just takes forever to darken down. So you always start with your darkest darks and you work your way up. And with watercolor, it's like, oh no, it's the opposite.
And like doing all your color studies ahead of time for me, it's like, and then also
Yeah.
prepare your I don't know if it's a technical term, but I say prepare your puddles. Get all your puddles ready because if you want to do any wet on wet, you don't have the fucking time to like fix it back. So, so what is in general? You know, you got sketching, kind of mid phase, and then final copy. Like, what is your favorite part?
Oh,
and then rendering at the end, because you probably enjoy rendering a lot. I enjoy it a lot too, because it's like you already know where it's going to end up, so there's a little less of that.
yeah.
But
Yeah, I guess I would actually have kind of a hard time saying what my favorite part is. I think I know what my least favorite part is. I know
what is that?
when I'm working on spec, when someone has got like a pretty well prescribed idea what they want for the final artwork. My least favorite part is sketching out the concept sketches of that, because it's like there's not really much room for me to improvise when the client has it pretty much figured out exactly what they want.
So this figure's here, this is there, this like to that degree.
Sometimes they'll even send me their own composition sketches, like we want some. I mean, they won't be like good or anything, but it will be like we want this and this and this. We want this in this corner, and like okay. So I really am just like translating your vision onto paper. All right. So when it comes to that part, that's usually my least favorite. If it is one of those jobs where they're like, just do you. We don't like. Here's some lyrics. Here's what what we're kind of about. Just do you. I love that, because then I can come up with basically anything, and it's much easier to like generate 5 or 6 sketches for them of possible concepts. So I know that's my least favorite, but the process from there, even just like laying out pencils, I like all of it. I find every stage, like when I finish it, to be really satisfying. The idea, I mean, I guess because I came to it so late, the idea that I'm drawing for a living is still kind of amazing to me. And so I just, even when I feel like kind of overwhelmed with work, I still find like the process of making to be really, really enjoyable. I always find it like to be tactile, like engaging in a tactile way, engaging in a visual way. I always find myself really satisfied. Like I think like going back to when I was a little kid, that's kind of why I was attracted to drawing in the first place, because I could have an idea in my head, but once I drew it, it was like real in the world. You know what I mean? Like, wow, now it's on paper, and it's not going to change. And it's not going to be like, it's not going to mutate with my little kid brain, And so I think I find every stage kind of enjoyable. Like I like laying out the pencils. I really enjoy going in with the brush and doing the first layer of like solid black values and starting to figure out like the light source, and starting to figure out where all the parts that are receding from the viewer, where all the parts that are protruding towards the viewer. I love figuring that stuff out. I love going in and starting to render in the detail. And I always try to leave, even when I lay the pencils out for a drawing, I always try to leave areas where I can improvise in ink, because improvising is kind of the fun part for me, of like making it up a little bit. I love there to be some unexpected development in the drawing before it's finished. So I love that part. I love finally finishing it. Oh, I know what my least favorite part is: digitizing it and editing it.
That's what I was wondering. I was like, do you do that part? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do. I definitely do. I do all the digitizing. I do all the editing. I mean, I took enough digital stuff when I was at CCS to know, like, I've actually, I wasn't sure if I was doing things right, because once again, I was never trained as an illustrator, but I got like a couple of compliments from some of the screen printing places that my clients use, where they're like, oh yeah, we never have to set your files up. Your files are always ready to go. Like, you're one of the few artists that their files are actually ready to, like, print ready when we get them. Like, I don't. Do
you have to like vectorize then, or is it just really getting the right pixels?
You just get the right black-white balance, and then I always run threshold on it. I took a silk screening class when I was at CCS, so I know how to make artwork print ready. I always run the threshold filter on my work, or threshold adjustment on my work in Photoshop, before I send it out to the client. If it's going to be silk screened, I always do that, because then they can just immediately go right to doing the transparency. They can go right to printing out the transparency. I don't have to do anything with my work. Huh. And I just know that because I took a silk screening class, and we had to do that every single time we turned artwork into, got artwork ready to put on transparency. You had to get out all the grays. And so if you just run threshold on it, like, that gets rid of all the grays. And you can adjust back and forth. And you might have to do some cleanup after you run threshold. If the image isn't high enough resolution, it can make a lot of noise. So I always scan at 600 DPI. I always give my clients a 600 DPI master file that they can work with. But they always have a 300 DPI print file. They can just go with that. But if they need, for some reason, to have a higher resolution master, they've got it. But so everything is done at a really high resolution, or like at least a an adequate resolution. So when I run that adjustment on it, it doesn't overly pixelate the artwork, because that's what it kind of does. But if it's like a really high res, you will not notice it when it's zoomed out. But it will get rid of all the gray, and then all I have to do is do the transparency. I don't have to do any extra work. So I do all that stuff, and I don't really mind it. Be honest, it doesn't really take that long to do it to a black and white piece of artwork. It's when I have to do paintings or anything for color that it starts to become, because you got to make sure it's in CMYK if it's going to be printed, and then you got to color matching to the original artwork can be a real pain in the ass. Like looking at making sure okay, I've got to do I've gotten to a thing where if it's paintings, I have to scan them at night when there's no sunlight in the studio. Because even the littlest bit of sunlight that gets in the scanner can throw off the color balance of the whole freaking thing.
How big is your scanner?
It's tiny. Freaking tiny.
So do you do piece at a time or what?
Scan slices and I put it together. Yeah, it sucks. It's awful. It's awful. But what are you going to do? I can't afford anything bigger right now. And it works. But it
gets so expensive the bigger you get, man.
Yeah, exactly. And I just have to make sure that I've controlled all the lighting in my studio before I do scanning anything in color, so that I don't have color balance problems. Even then, color matching can still be kind of a pain, but that is probably my least favorite part. I have a policy of I won't do graphic design. I'll put your logo on the shirt if you want your logo to be put on the shirt.
Right.
And that's usually a whole nother thing of okay, so do you have a high res version of your logo? And they're like, what's that?
I've actually run that a lot.
They send me a 72 DPI JPEG, and they're like, "That's what the logo guy sent us." I'm like, "Well, you got ripped off. Your logo guy should have sent you a vector file." Yeah. And so I've for clients I've occasionally just free of charge vectorized their logo for them, just so that now this is what you need to use from now on. Don't send the JPEG. Send this .ai or .eps file. Do not to future illustrators or to future screen printing places. Do not send this piece of shit JPEG. Get rid of it. Don't use it anymore. So I've done that for them, but I don't like to do graphic design. If I wasn't trained as an illustrator, I definitely was not trained as a graphic designer.
Yeah.
So I hate Illustrator with a passion.
That's my wife does. She's a graphic designer, so I've been using her as a crutch for the last 10 years. And I think I'm about cut off from that, so I gotta learn some shit soon. But yeah, that's really interesting. A lot of the overlap here. Now I did go ahead.
I was gonna say, part of it too is I got into art because when I was in my years of exile where I was I'm not gonna be a teacher and I don't know what I want to do. I did a data entry job for quite a while, and part of the thing with doing art for a living is I don't want to sit in front of the fucking computer. You know what I mean? Anything I could do to minimize my computer time. I don't mind, doing some emails. I have to catch up on my emails for Shoggoth Kinetics. At least once a week, I'll actually have to spend an hour on email, and that's fine. I don't mind doing file management. I don't mind doing admin stuff, as long as it's kept to a minimum. But if it's graphic design where I'm sitting at the computer for hours and hours and hours, it's fuck no, that's not what I got into this for. That's not what I signed up for. I signed up to be drawing and occasionally, sending things to people over email or doing a little bit of file management. So yeah, so I try to stay away from it. I try to keep a list of people that I know who are graphic designers who are looking for work, and I'll just be yeah, go to this person.
Nice.
Send them to someone else. Try to pay it forward. Give give my colleagues some work if they're looking for some, and keep me from having to be on the computer too much.